VGC recently got the chance to travel to Remedy Entertainment in Finland to play a few hours of FBC Firebreak, the upcoming 3-player shooter in the Control universe. After our session, we sat down for a special podcast with Mike Kayatta, game director on FBC Firebreak. We chatted about the game, where it fits into the modern gaming landscape, and how it captures Remedy's weirdness in a genre that's a bold new step for the veteran Finnish studio. So in terms of this project, it's a bit of a strange, kind of unexpected left turn, especially for the Control universe, like directly after that game. How did it start? How did you get involved? Like, what was that kind of process like?
Yeah, it's a really valid question I'm sure a lot of people have about it, because obviously the game is extremely different and new for Remedy in a lot of ways. First self-published title, online first-person shooter, and then, as you said, also even different within its own context of being part of Control. So yeah, lots of valid questions there. So basically, it kind of started with Remedy moving away from a single project model into like a multi-project model, which means that we can work on a lot of games at the same time. Of course, Remedy has a style of game, I'd say, it's become quite known for, narrative-driven, exploratory, often like tense or horror-tinged, and of course with that kind of Remedy weirdness, etc. And so I think when we had the chance to do lots of different types of games, one of the most, at least internally, obvious ideas was to say, like, well, what else can we do? And really the first question that came up was, what would it be like if we let more than one person into the Remedy universe at the same time? And that's actually how it started. So it started from the perspective of what is that like? And that is actually like wildly different than you might think immediately, just because everything is so orchestrated in a Remedy game, where like you'd be surprised at how much like people actually understand, like, well, what is every angle this person could walk through a door at, and what exactly will they see, and when does that trigger this music, whatever, and you let go of all of that control, no pun intended, the minute that you step into multiplayer and you just throw people into a space, especially if it's replayable, where they're going to see the same thing over and over. So anyway, all that to say, that's kind of how it started. We tried to think of like, well, it's going to be sort of like a humble scope, humble budget, humble game team. And from that perspective, like, where do we really want to invest our time and our resources and our creativity? And I think that's where we started to think of like, well, let's get interconnected within the pre-existing universe. And Control, to me, was like just a slam dunk choice, just because it's so rich and kind of by its own narrative design, you don't know everything about it. There's so many more things to see. And so really, honestly, the origins of the project were just sort of like, what if you had multiple people inside of Control at the same time? Mixed with the fact that Remedy just wanted to kind of do something new and maybe try to earn the chance to be known as a company that can do more than one thing.
And in terms of working in like the Control universe, obviously this is coming a few years after Control, in the midst of the development of the sequel. Was there ever a worry about kind of conflicting lore? Like, is this set in the same universe as Control? Is it all kind of lore compliant? But does the oldest house give you some license to just be like, well, this is just a part of the oldest house you've never seen?
Lore compliant definitely sounds like a department inside of Control. So first of all, we're very thoughtful. Like, I even if there were to be a license to sort of say, whatever, it's the eldest house, or oh, it's weird, anything can happen. Like, this is not allowed. This thinking is not allowed. Nor would I want it to be allowed. No. So basically, like, we think through everything. That said, there are practicalities and things like this, of course, and so we have to choose our battles. But as it stands, FBC Firebreak stands as a piece of canon inside of the timeline of the Control universe. So FBC Firebreak set 6 years after the events of Control. How that ties into any sort of future stuff that's going on with Control or Control 2, will not say anything about whatsoever. But I will say that like this is a canonical exploration of a time period that existed in the oldest house.
Okay, that's very, very complete and knocks out so many of my questions. It's like, so who's the director?
Gotcha.
In terms of like inspirations from the game, from what I played, it's like obviously shades of Left 4 Dead, shades of things like Helldivers, but I just spoke to two other developers, Timu and Ansi, and they spoke about Overcooked as a touch point. And I said to them, literally as I was playing the game, doing the RBLB minigame, I was like, this is so Overcooked.
Really?
Good. So what are the kind of things you were playing around the time coming up with this, the stuff you're still taking from now?
Yeah. Overcooked was one of the early ones. I mean, honestly, like the trajectory, as I've now pieced it together after talking about this a few times, the trajectory really started oddly with like we had a lot of like sort of like prototype ideas, and we were people in a oldest house like box with guns for a little while and saying like, what feels good and what feels bad, and for me, like the really horrible epiphany came with Power Wash Simulator, because I was just playing this game and it's so fun to like do nothing in that game really until you get to like 1% of the dirt left, in which case that game can go into the trash as far as I'm concerned. Nothing against the game. I just oh man, my brain hurts. Anyway, all that to say, it was like I remember having this thought of like, what if you were like interrupted power washing by like a zombie and you suddenly had to turn around and like kill it quickly and then go back to it, which would ruin that game, by the way. So terrible thought. But then it definitely just sparked this weird chain of ideas about like you doing maintenance work or like doing these more like meditative things. And of course, it's not like that was the first time that had ever been thought of, because then we were looking at Deep Rock at the same time. And Deep Rock is actually the most brilliant of any game that does this, where you really get lost into just like mining the caves and finding ore, and then you're like, oh my god, bugs, and it gets so exciting, and then it comes back down. And when I talk to people who play a lot of Deep Rock, they always kind of comment that sometimes what they like about the game is just kind of like just mining and just digging, and like it's not even really doing anything. There's just something so like just naturally fulfilling about it. And so those are kind of maybe where it started. Not that we explored Power Wash Simulator more than that anecdote, to be fair. But that said, like from there we started thinking about like, oh, should we go toward the game like GTFO, which is like really, really hardcore, scary cooperative. And we started wondering like, oh, like what if the hiss were terrifying, and actually these people, they see one hiss and they are like screwed, and then it just didn't really feel fun. I actually narratively am extremely interested in this idea. It just was never fun. And so then like from there we started looking at Overcooked, because we were like, well, what is a co-op model that hasn't really been brought into this quote unquote Left 4 Dead 2 space, this like session co-op shooter space. And Overcooked was this great example of something where you just kind of are always working toward the same goal, but you're always pressured by this idea of efficiency. And this actually had this weird overlap with Deep Rock too, because in Deep Rock, like you can't really fail, except for if you take your sweet time, the bugs come more and more and more and more often until suddenly you're overwhelmed. And this is kind of a structure that we took a lot of inspiration from. So that's probably like where we were at, like looking at like a lot of the intensity, the chaos, and just the raw kind of thrill, and also accessibility of Left 4 Dead. Like you don't really have to understand anything to play Left 4 Dead. You just go in and you're like, oh cool, I'm in a zombie movie and here's zombies, I should probably get rid of the zombies. And then also looking at something like, like Deep Rock, and then to a lesser extent, but still as a very important kind of flavor on it, what is it like to just kind of quote unquote do cooperative work that is sometimes interrupted by enemies. So that's kind of where we came from.
And in terms of like the game itself, why 3 players rather than 2 or 4? What is that about that sweet spot?
Yeah, so I think for 4 players, we started a little bit there, and I think actually we even released concept art, probably way too early, that showed 4 people, and everyone was like, wait, what, 3? What happened? Well, Bill died is what happened. He's not with us anymore, it's 3. But no, what really happened was, when we started getting into, like, to go back to the Overcooked thing, things got really chaotic quite quickly, and we knew that we wanted it to be important for people to kind of stick together, not to, like, GTFO levels, but like to stick together a lot and think about your friends. And with 4, it was so overwhelming to like understand where people were. We also have like a perk system we've been really interested in, where actually like when you level up your perks all the way, you start sharing them. And like it's just like everything gets multiplied out once you get up to 4 players. And so then we started testing with 3, and things just felt way better. So it was very organic. It wasn't really like, oh, like what does the audience data say about friend groups? And maybe it should have been that. But honestly, it just felt like, hey, this is where the game feels good. 2 players, honestly, I have to say, I never even tested and considered, because I think there are games out there, like now Split Fiction, before then other ones, where like 2-player co-op is such a thing. Like it's almost like its own genre, I think. Like, and I don't have a lot of examples in my head, maybe you do or somebody else does, but of like a 2-player cooperative experience that isn't based on that binary,
Yeah.
you know? And we knew that we wanted it to be more developed, and which is not to say Split Fiction and those games are underdeveloped. I just mean like we wanted to explore more of like the free-form complexities of multiplayer, so we didn't go that low.
Like different dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love two-player games, by the way. I mean,
yeah.
my wife is a gamer, thank goodness, because we play everything. Anything that we can play together, we play. So no problems there. It's just for this, it just felt kind of like restrictive, or like it would really have taken us in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask about the balance between like something that's very gameplay focused, like a kind of cooperative shooter, and the trademark Remedy. And this is an explicit podcast, so weird shit.
Yeah.
How do you balance that, and how do you make sure that the people like me
Yeah.
who are massive Remedy nerds, I've already played it and seen stuff that I'm
Sure.
like, that's one for the heads. But how do you balance that for people that are like, I have no idea what Control is. I've not played any of these games.
Ooh, it's tough, right? Because I do think that like to be successful creatively, you have to kind of like pick something that's like hard or even stupid to try to get right. And like I think like Remedy as a whole, the thing that they do that is stupid is they pick these very niche, heady sort of things, right? Like it's not like David Lynch was the world's most like successful director. I mean, count on like on one hand like how many people watched Inland Empire, but it works for Remedy because that's what they decided that they were going to do that other people were too scared to do, right? And so in a sense, like with Firebreak, we had this weird paradox where on one hand, it was very important to me to remain Remedy-esque, and that brings with it that inherent, again, like purposeful, but inherent problem of something that can be kind of like niche or arcane or like esoteric in like a way that can be off-putting. Of course, it makes the people who like that stuff love it, which is great. That's the trade. But also for this sort of genre, we knew we needed people to say like, hey, I'm into this, but my friend is going to be way scared off, and I need to be armed to kind of convince my friend to play this game with me. And so the approach was to try to find a fantasy that could be very relatable, even if it's not obvious what that fantasy is. And so for me, it was like firefighting, where you're like basically an everyday person who puts on the gear, grabs weird equipment, deals with a crisis, and then, you know, that crisis is going to come back one day, but you're like, okay, for today I did my job, I go home, I put back my weird gear and move on with my life, and it's a cyclical thing. But of course, because it's Control, fire's way too boring, although we also have fire, you know, but we wanted to have these like weird things. And so from there, after we had what we felt like was, at least if you dig enough, a relatable kind of cyclical sort of like fantasy of heroics, if you will, it came into saying like, okay, every creative idea that comes forward needs to pass a test. And the test is, could this only happen in Control? Or is this something only Remedy would do? Or is this, in the last layer, is this something only we, the kind of crazy creatives at the heart of this specific game, would be willing to do? And so obviously when you get stuff like sticky notes, that was something that could pass that test. But if you talk about other more quote unquote like traditional objectives, like oh, someone is being held hostage or is in danger, like can you go rescue them? We rejected that right away. And that's not to say other games don't do well with those objectives. Of course they do. It's just like that wasn't the thing that only we could do. And with such like a modest scope and budget and team, it was super, super important, not just to keep the Remedy flavor, but just to make sure that when we decided to do something, it was always going to feel impactful. Now, that said, some people are still like, what on earth is the sticky notes? And I don't get it. And, you know, that's just what we sign up for by being Remedy, I guess, to some degree. But we're trying to open up the door more.
When we played it today, obviously we're all sitting right next to each other,
Sure.
and we're on Discord. We can communicate really easily. You're going to have players who play this who are either playing it entirely themselves, playing it with people who don't have mics, like that whole setup. How do you make sure people can communicate, especially when it's so important on those higher kind of threat levels?
Yeah, and I this hits me personally because like I shouldn't say this, but man, I like never play with mics. The only game I play with a mic is this game. I've heard too many 12-year-olds singing Britney Spears at me going back to Xbox 360 days and beyond to be interested in that these days. But that said, so we thought about that quite a bit. So first of all, of course, we have like a ping system. We also tried to make a pretty smart ping system. We're still tuning it a little bit, but stuff that basically says like, if you ping something that needs a specific tool, it will only show up for the person carrying that tool, and it will become like an important thing inside of the UI for them. So we have like this, and there's general pings and dynamic pings and things like this, and like we hope that helps. We also have been doing a lot of work, some of it in what you played, and some of it is literally ongoing, this morning even, trying to reduce the number of objective markers, even when there's lots of things people could be doing. And the goal there is that like even if there are 10 things you could be doing, only one of them is really marked. So presumably, if you're not really coordinating, naturally you will tend to go together. We also have like a widget in the game that you may or may not have noticed, because I think we've updated the UI element from that build, but whatever, which kind of tells you how many people are close to you. And the only compass in the game is only pointing at where other people are. And so we hope to have some of these sort of systems, especially like UI, that just generally bring people together. And then the last piece is like how the game actually functions on a design level, which is to say that it's very hard to not be helpful in this game. Now, you can be inefficient, but you are going to be helpful. And to go back to like the Overcooked thing, typically speaking, you're helping the team. You might not be helping well. And the question is did you do enough to win the match, or did you not do enough to win the match? Not were you helping? And so the hope is that if you're not coordinating, if you're taking on like low levels, if you're zoning out, your mic's off, people aren't in sync, whatever, ultimately there's a natural flow toward progression. That said, we also make the game highly customizable. And yeah, if you want to take on the highest difficulties and everything else, you probably need to coordinate. But that doesn't, give you exclusive access to things. That's one way to play. And of course, it has accelerated reward path and all these other things. But you can technically get through all of the metagame and progression on what I will call like little baby mode. It'll take you a very long time. So I hope you're a very patient person. But at the same time, like we wanted to just kind of let people make their own sessions for this reason.
Timmy and Nancy talked about this being a dad game.
Yes.
Speak to that in terms of, I'm not a father, but the idea of being able to play something in very short bursts is hugely appealing to me as someone who has a million things to do every day.
Yeah.
Was that a real kind of priority in development? And do you think I think that'll resonate with a lot of people who are kind of, they want to get into games like this, but the time investment is ridiculous in so many of them.
I could talk for hours about this, and I won't, I promise. But I think, like, first of all, yeah, absolutely super important to us. As Ansi said, I am also like a dad. I have 2 kids. One of them is a baby. This a lot of time pressure. And I think as gamers get older, this is a way oversimplification, but we kind of think of like people as, you get a little bit more like time poor and cash rich. Like you're a little bit more stable financially, and so you get a little bit less concerned by the price tag of a game. But all of a sudden, you're super scared about time because the world is just horribly unfair, and the minute that you can actually afford to play the games you want to play, you no longer have time to play them. And so the idea is that like a lot of people, especially as they get older, they still love gaming, but maybe they only have like an hour a week, and so for us this was huge, because first of all, it affects all of us personally, but secondly, like I do think it resonates with people. And actually, even if you don't have kids or whatever, I don't want to be like, oh, you're gonna hate this because you actually do have time. No, it's like, but the other joke is that if you don't have kids, maybe you have a backlog. And actually, it functions pretty much the same way. There are so many games out, and so many of them are actually incredible that, I mean, everyone I talk to has a backlog of like 20 games. Yeah. And by the way, not trash, like great games. And that's also its own time commitment for a gamer. So even if you don't have a kid, it's kind of the same problem. And so we knew that, like, whether it's forced because of children or whether it's just what you want because, of course, an amazing game or like Oblivion just suddenly shows up and you're like, well, there goes, 70, 90 hours of my life, whatever that is, maybe you just have an hour that you're willing to put into a, more like kind of humble scope game like this, which is great. But then we always thought about this, like, well, what if you play a game that has like a 40-minute session, but you have an hour, and then you play 40 minutes with your friends? What do you do for those 20 minutes? Do you just stop gaming early? Well, that sucks. Do you start a game and then quit the match halfway through? Or do you like break your schedule and miss out on something else? That's terrible too. So we added lots of like customization options for difficulty, session length, and you can actually legitimately play this game in like a 4-minute session at max difficulty. I don't know that that's always the most fun way to play the game, but I'm really happy to make that available to people. And the last thing I'll say, I did promise I wouldn't talk for hours, but 1 hour is
You're
not
welcome
technically
to.
a plural.
My flight's tomorrow. You can talk as long as you want.
So I think the other part of it is, and this was wild to me. Just got mentioned. Somebody mentioned this to me just this week. They were saying that they were playing 5 games that all had battle passes, and they loved all 5 of these games legitimately, like really was a fan. And they looked at the math and they were like, actually, if I play these 5 games, I mathematically cannot complete all of the battle passes in these games. And he told me that he had to decide 2 of the games to quit basically forever to be able to actually, with all the time in the world, complete the other 3 battle passes. And this is crazy to me, because that means there are 2 games that this guy loved that he had to stop playing, a game he loves, that he had to stop playing because he mathematically could not do it. That's crazy to me. That's a sad state. And so for me, that was another big thing about Firebreak, was just making sure that like you could kind of come into the game on your terms instead of the game's terms. Like, we don't want to try to like fight for your minutes and seconds and hours and say like, you better come back every day or else. It's like a very like abusive relationship almost. Like we just wanted to say, look, it's fun for when you're ready, and we want to make it as fun as possible. And if you want to give it 100 hours, oh my gosh, thank you, and that's amazing, and let's do it. If not, you have an hour, 2 hours, whatever, once a week, you want to like disappear wait till another update, come back for a bit, disappear again, that's actually fine. And we've kind of designed around that flexibility so that we can kind of fit into a person's life instead of ask them to kind of fit into whatever we just decided that life should be, if that makes sense.
It's actually an interesting point there about fitting into someone's life, and I wanted to relate it to the price point of the game. Obviously, the price point of the game is not something you're like intimately deciding or whatever, but in a world where we are actively talking about $80 games, to have something that's like a $40 experience that will be on subscription services, it puts it in a kind of unique space in the market. Like, what are your thoughts personally on that in terms of, do you think that'll attract people that wouldn't have necessarily given it a shot as a full price game?
Yeah, I hope so. And I also think like the scope and the price point are in harmony as well. Like, some of it is also like a meta expectation. I think like if you go out and sell a game for $10, like gamers just associate that with something.
Yeah.
And so for me with the price, it was like really important also to get it right. I mean, of course, there's a bunch of, business calculations behind things, and because obviously like game studios are businesses, but the most important thing, in my opinion, is just matching expectation with reality. And this is not counting free-to-play for a minute, just with priced games. And I think that there is like a paradigm starting to form, because people are realizing that like AAA games, if you can even call them that anymore, are sometimes going up to like $1 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like literally impossible. Like, and if that was the standard, Remedy would cease to exist tomorrow. Like Remedy doesn't make games for $1 billion. I mean, that's wild. And the market can only support so much of that. And then I think that's why you see a lot of people in the industry right now losing their jobs, which is terrible, because people are pushing and pushing and striving for stuff that I question if it's even bringing player value. Some of them absolutely are. I mean, I adored the new God of War, and like it delivered for me. But then I see other games, and I'm not going to name anything specific because I don't want to disparage any other game. They don't deserve it. But the thing is like there's a lot of them that are spending so much money, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to play this for like 7 hours. Like, what a waste. And that's a shame. So for me, I think this is like that price point that should communicate to people, look, you're not going to get something that you could play for 700 hours and you're still exploring regions and power crawling and whatever you want to be doing at this point. Like, this is a game that kind of is at that scope, and it's for people who want something at that scope. And for me, personally, it's also a lot more like sustainable for the industry as well, to say that like it's okay to have a game that's not asking to take up your life, but I also never wanted it to feel like disposable, because like that's also setting the wrong expectation and telling people that maybe like there's not necessarily care or a future for that game. And then free to play is a whole nother conversation, but basically free to play is like more expensive and more complicated to make than premium, and so that was never in our our radar for this game.
What does Firebreak look like in a year to you?
Wildly successful, everyone's favorite game. No,
thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah. No, I mean, like in a year or so, we're gonna come out with like 5 jobs. We think about jobs kind of more like game modes, and so we hope that they have more depth than what sometimes people say levels, and I always kind of like cringe up a little bit because I'm like, oh, that sounds horrible. But like we really do think about them as ways of playing. And so at the end of this year, we'll have 2 more. So we'll have grown by about 40% in our content already, which I'm quite excited about. I'm hoping what things look like is a game that has like attracted a lot of people to at least try it. I hope a lot of those people find reason enough to stick. If they didn't stick, then I hope we can show them with a lot of like updates and a lot of transparency, like what we're doing and how we're trying to build it to kind of like earn them to stick. And ultimately, what I hope this does is when people talk about Remedy, they say, oh yeah, Remedy is that studio that delivers these amazing story-driven single-player experiences. And they also have shown that this is another side of them that they can do as well. And it doesn't mean that it takes away from the other one or that it pulls focus or anything else like that. It just means that, you know, people say, right, Remedy can do this sort of thing, and they don't have, you know, the same 25 years of like direct iterative experience building that out yet, but this is the start of that journey, and I can be part of shaping that if I kind of participate and speak up. And especially with a small studio like us, like we are literally listening all the time and want to kind of work with the community. So that's what I hope.
Well, before we wrap things up, we'll get some quick fire questions that the VGC community were desperate to know. I like to call this the no comment relay, but let's see what we can get out of it.
Okay.
Do the Threshold kids appear?
I'm actually gonna say no comment.
Okay. Does Ati the janitor appear?
No comment.
And finally, in the no comment relay, do the old gods of Asgard appear in the game?
I will comment on this because I did comment on this before. Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
At launch.
At launch.
Not to give you any
Old Gods of Asgard playable characters coming in year 2.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed playing it today.
Okay, awesome. And thank you for coming and playing.
Of course. I love Finland. I've loved Finland since I was about 14 years old because I'm a big metalhead, and Him is my favourite band of all time.
Well,
so,
hey, this is where you go.
So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks to Mike for joining us on the show, and thanks to Remedy Entertainment for their hospitality. You can support VGC on patreon.com/videogameschronicle and check out more of our FBC Firebreak coverage on VGC. Thank you.